Black Circle family, we are back for another episode and I am joined with Yolanda Mercy. Welcome, welcome. And I need to say this because BAFTA nominated Yoruba Gal. I love it. I love it. Let's talk about it. So how are you today?
Good. I was just saying to Kadeem that it's been a very, very quick day. Like everything is just rushing ahead. I'm like, oh, okay. It's already like the evening and I feel like everything is a blur.
Yeah.
So, I mean, totally like...
Do you think it's to do with like now the nights are drawing in a little bit, so now we're feeling it, the days are getting shorter?
Yeah, I think that. And also I think we're on that sort of like grey weather.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on?
Yes, I know. But I want to jump in with everything you're doing, all the amazing things you've done, everything that's coming up. So let's get into it. I mentioned BAFTA nominated, but let's start a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah, please.
What are some of your early inspirations that led into creative field of writing and performing?
I think it was very much of the thing of like seeing shows on TV and wanting to be a part of that world. Mm-hmm. And that started off with me then going and creating my own work. And I think that's snowballed from being in sort of like theatre to then doing radio and then going ahead and doing television, which has been like the most exciting process to kind of go from an idea to having in front of an audience, you know what I mean?
Definitely. I think I read somewhere as well that you went to Brit School, is that correct?
Yeah, I did.
Yes, yeah. So kind of how was those formative years in Brit School and how did that also lend itself to your trajectory?
Oh, it was brilliant because it's one of the best training grounds to be in a school where you can learn but also fail. I think failure is also a really important thing to be able to experience as an artist and as a creative, to try out ideas and go, okay, cool, that didn't work. What do I want to do next? How will I do the next thing? And I think Brit School was just the perfect place to sort of like learn, make some new friends, and also just really like immerse myself into the world of being in the industry.
Definitely. And I guess it creates that kind of space for you to kind of bring out that. Would you say you've always had that in you, that side to perform? Is that something?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I've always wanted to be in the entertainment industry, like from a very young age, watching like MTV. Do you remember the Wade Robson project, the one where he basically would like do choreography and like you would watch it on TV but you would learn it at home and be like you're there as well? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right.
In the sort of like time period when he was on TV, it was essentially all about like being a creative, and MTV was the sort of like hub for all of that. And I think watching MTV, I was like, oh, I really want to like perform.
Yes, I think you mentioned this on your website because I was just doing a little bit of digging. Yeah. And I really love on your website that you have a picture of your younger self.
Yeah.
So kind of what was that energy that you was challenging in that picture when you was the one that's on your website?
I think it was just all about like being performative, being in front of a camera and sort of like telling a story. I love telling stories, and that for me is like one of the biggest things for me of like finding a story I want to tell, getting it out as quickly as possible, because I do believe ideas are like in the ether. So if you don't activate that idea, somebody else will.
Yes, I love that concept. And I think I read somewhere that an idea, inspiration, it kind of comes to you, it knocks on your door until you kind of answer it. And then if you don't answer it, it kind of moves on to somebody else. So I really love that concept. It's so interesting.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say we're talking about your early years and you are a Nigerian British writer and performer. So how does your cultural background shape the stories you choose to tell? And how was it impacted your career within the UK and international art scene?
So I would say the biggest thing for me is storytelling. And I think growing up in a household where you're hearing like the very first form of like storytelling is hearing your mom or your aunts or grandparents telling stories from their life and the culture, and that really shaped the kind of stories that I wanted to make. I knew that I wanted to tell stories that resonated to me and other people who look like me, and that was a whole thing of like trying to find the best way to tell those stories. And the first one that I did was called Quarter Life Crisis. Essentially it was about me turning 26, being 25, turning 26, and kind of feeling like everyone around me knew what they wanted to do with their life, whereas like I was trying to figure out how to keep my young person's rail card, which kind of felt really silly. But also a thing of like, turning 26, you're supposed to be an adult. You're supposed to have everything together, but some people don't.
You don't even have that figured out in your 40s, honestly. Your 30s, your 40s. I think it's a continual process of like learning and unlearning. And we're really kind of indoctrinated. You have to be married by this time. You have to have kids by this time. It's this constant, of... exactly.
Right. And you constantly feel it. And I think especially as a woman, you feel it a lot, right? You compare yourself constantly because when you look at the metrics of like the generations before us had children younger. And sort of like were able to buy a house sooner, and the world that we kind of sort of like graduated into was the world of the recession.
Right.
So it was like, okay, cool. How do we make this happen? And it's sort of like, for a lot of us, they're like starting families later, probably not going to own their own home, and trying to figure out this sort of like gig economy.
Exactly. And we are going to come on to quarter life crisis in a bit, so I want to kind of dig more into that. And like I said, you've worked on so many projects, and not only kind of, at home, but internationally as well. And so, your creative projects across 8 countries and 3 continents. So how has your international experience influenced your storytelling and artistic style?
I definitely think it's helped me to like connect with an artistic community. So like, I love it because like, when I go to places, and I've written a story very much in my home, and a lot of the time, very early works anyway, was like me in London in my bedroom writing this story and then taking it to Nigeria where people are like, oh my God, I resonate with the story. And then working with people in Australia who are very much, I resonate with the story. So it's like, yeah, this might be a story that's specific to me in my sort of like closed time, closed space, but it has a sort of universal appeal to other people who go, I know exactly what that's like. I experienced those things. And I really do enjoy getting the chance to like share work internationally, because yeah, we might be on different time zones, but ultimately we're human beings. We have very similar experiences.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Australia there. So what's your experience? I think as Black British people, we're kind of familiar with like the diaspora in America and Africa and the Caribbean, but not so much Australia. So what was your experience working there?
Oh man, I met my fellow Nigerians out there, like
everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Nigerians were everywhere. We're everywhere. And I have some really good friends who I talk to quite a lot, and like whenever I go back, it's like a chance to see them. And like I did Edinburgh Fringe this summer, and someone who I'd met in Australia was there doing their show, so we got to hang out. So it's sort of like this thing of like the world is feeling so much smaller.
It really is,
right? And I just love that though, because I do think if there is an idea that someone has who's like watching this or listening to this and goes, oh, I want to try it and do it here, do it.
Yeah.
Like one thing that COVID has definitely taught me is like, I remember what it's like to not be able to go past the bottom of my street, or you know what I mean, or past a certain area, because also I was afraid. I think I was terrified, to be honest. I was so anxious about everything, and it took a while to get back into like being around people. And I promised myself that off the back of that, I was going to just try and be brave and do everything that I ever think, oh, that thing I want to do, rather than leaving it as a thing I want to do. Yeah. I think I'm going to do.
Yes. Yeah, you're turning it into thinking, into doing.
Actioning things.
Yes, exactly that. And again, one familiar theme that keeps coming up with all my guests that sit on the sofa is just this transformative time that happened during COVID. And it's either it was transformative or it was kind of a chance to sit and recollect yourself a little bit, So it's a common theme. It's really, it was a horrible time for most people, but there was something really magical that happened for a lot of people. And it created space for people to think, okay, like you just said, I'm going to do,
Like for me, I lost people in COVID. So it was a really like challenging like world to be in.
Yeah.
Especially like a thing that came from nowhere and forced us to be in our homes, and then forced us to sort of like be so disconnected. And for some people, like, I guess I've always been connected to friends, but I didn't realize how isolating it really was until you're like, I don't get to see those people that I would just go to the theatre with or sit around like in a park with. I can't do that.
Yeah.
So it became this thing of like, when the light at the end of the tunnel happened, when we could actually go outside, there was just sort of like trepidation, because I was terrified of going out. I was so scared. But then eventually you kind of like got back to feeling okay. And I think there are people, and I think myself included, at points where I still do have a little bit of like those lingerings at points where I do get a bit scared.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have that as well.
I think it was a little bit different. I also kind of lost loved ones during that period, and it was hard. But I think my attitude is I'm just very much like, not strong-willed, but it's just very much like, this is what it is, I accept it, and we're just going to power through it. It's very much like, we're powering through, we'll get to the other side, and I realise everybody's got different ways that they reacted in that moment, So yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. But yeah, it was this very bizarre time, and we're still feeling the knockoff effects from it, But I want to talk about some of your projects. So we'll start with Failure Project, and that debuted at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, right?
Yep.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So that deals with strings attached to success, like some of those type of elements and themes. As someone who's achieved so much, what does success mean to you now, and how do you navigate the pressure of it?
I think success is ever changing. And I think one of the things that I wish I'd known earlier that I would love to tell people is like, success is whatever you want it to mean to you. And I think for a very long time we were told that success means this.
Right.
So you have to do this and this to get this. But also the world changes so much. So even if I did this and this, the time in which I do it in, I might not get the same result. And so for me, I think one of the things that keeps me so grounded and humbled is like just remembering why.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? What is it I want to get from this? And also like happiness. I know that sounds really like, oh my gosh, happiness, but happiness is so important. Like that whole thing, I think it's in the Bible. Like, what does it gain a man if he inherits the world but loses his soul? And I think that I always like sit with that, whether you believe in God or whatever. It's still a really interesting like piece of like a parable to think on, you know, and meditate about, because you go, it's so true. Like, so the ultimate thing is like, who are you?
Yeah.
What do you actually want in life? And at night, you have to feel comfortable with all the decisions you've made. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me. So like, whenever I think about things, and I'm very grateful for all of the opportunities I've ever had and all the support I've had, and I think about those constantly of like, cool, I'm happy. Yeah. That's what my version of like success or like the things I want to do next are, like my guiding light.
I love that. I love that happiness to ground you, essentially. When you're saying that about the parable, it's like what grounds you, what keeps you, you know, centered is so important. Do you want to talk a little bit about Failure Projects? That's your most recent project today, isn't it? So talk us through it. What was the premises of it and how did you get the idea for it?
So Failure Project debuted in August 2024 at Summer Hall. It did really well. Like, it's so interesting, a show that I essentially felt like a failure whilst making because I didn't have funding for it.
Right.
And so automatically that makes you feel like a failure because you're like, how am I going to do this? And the venue were really supportive. It was at Summer Hall in Edinburgh. They gave the space and I was able to tell the story about this woman called Ade, who essentially, without ruining it too much, is on a journey to sort of like trying to find the best version of herself, but struggles because she's made it as people see it. But actually, even though she's made it, she feels like she's losing herself. And I think that, for me, that was really interesting sort of like point of view, because we always hear about a character trying to make it. What happens when you have made it?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that was sort of like what, for me, was like the story I wanted to unpick. And it just feels like the beginning in a way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're saying like what happens when you do make it, you know. I know that there's so much more to come for you, but do you ever think about, okay, how will I manage that when that moment arrives for me?
Yeah, I think about it all the time, and I think one of the biggest things is like always thinking about my why, having a really good support system around me, and also being really mindful of like how to look after myself. And there's no shame in being like, actually I need to take some time away just to figure some things out. I'm getting better at doing that. I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
Are you the same?
A little bit. Again, I'm very like strong-willed. You know, maybe that's a little bit of a facade. I don't know, but I think, yeah, at times I'm very good at saying no.
Oh, are you?
Yeah,
that's really good.
I've learned. I'm just like no, but like, you know, not in a horrible way. It's just always like it's powerful no's, it's honest no's. You know, and I think I've learned how to do that a lot better in the years that have gone by. You know. Yeah.
And it's also like the whole thing people say is no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
So it's not how it's like no, and the reason why is it a no, you can just say no.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it is what it is, you know. I'm not going to say it for a flippant reason. So yeah, I just
yeah. I totally hear you. I love it though.
And you mentioned quarter life crisis a little bit earlier, so let's dig into that a little bit more. So this speaks to the millennial, I can't say that word, millennial angst.
Yeah.
Of growing up before your time. So what inspired you to explore this theme? And do you feel it resonates differently with audiences today?
I think it still has a very similar feel to everyone. Like, I've had people who are Gen Zs kind of say like, oh my gosh, I know that feeling. Because it's that whole thing of like expectation. So by a certain age, you're supposed to have this thing. And I still think that is still very apparent across all age groups of like, by a certain age. And like, this is a quarter life crisis, but I'm sure there's sort of like a 35 crisis. I'm sure there's a 40s crisis, a 50s crisis, you know, because it's like you're supposed to have this. And for this particular play, it was that whole thing of like, for me at that time was like, by being a young person, because my young person's rail card was expiring.
Yeah.
So I was an adult, even though I was already an adult, but I didn't feel like it because I was having all these cool discounts and like all of these sort of like things that allowed me to be able to survive in London, because London's expensive.
Very. Yeah.
And I think that was my inspiration for that show, and it's funny, but also it's really, people said it's really honest and it's really heartfelt and it's very relatable. And the same thing they say about Failure Project is like, I think Failure Project isn't as like laugh out loud funny. I think you're more like laughing more at the situations, but you're also like thinking and you're also resonating with like the character more than like laughing at a situation. Got you.
Yeah, I think this whole kind of, you know, like you said, it kind of crosses over for, like, for millennials, Gen Z, Boomer, Gen X. Like, there's a common theme for all of us. Yes, it's different generations, but the common theme is underlying, like you said, about this angst. And even though, you know, your rail card expiring, you've got your 65 pass to look forward to.
And you can also get 2 for 2. Like, if you have a friend that covers loads, you and them can have like a 2 for 2 rail card, right?
Right, exactly. So it's just all these landmarks, you know, as you progress through life, and it's just kind of funny. You swap one thing for another; it never stops. It's crazy. So let's get on to Queenie.
Yeah.
So he was in the writer's room for that. And I've watched Queenie, and I've some frustrations with the character, definitely. She's an interesting character.
Yeah.
So what was it like to contribute to such an important project, and how do you approach translating the themes of identity, race and mental health from book to screen?
Yeah, so I think something like that was a book that I think a lot of people read.
Right.
And I think Candice, who wrote the book, did a really good job of being able to capture a world that she knew, and was very instrumental in making sure that like audiences who loved the book were also able to see the Queenie that they imagined. You know, the whole like on the cover of the book, her with her braids, and then seeing her with braids in the TV show. They were like, it was that nod to thank you for reading my book, and sort of like a nod to like having that on the show. And being in the writer's room was really interesting to crack open this book that all of us had read, maybe, like I think I'd read it like 4 or 5 years beforehand.
Right.
So having to reread it and like sort of look at what the themes were and like supporting that sort of collective vision. Because when you're in a writer's room, it's not just yours. It's the collective vision of what it is. And then ultimately it's Candice's because it's her show. So it's really good as a writer to be able to have the opportunity to support somebody else with their vision.
Yeah.
And I think, it's been a really cool process as well, doing like writer's rooms for other people's shows. That's part of my writing journey, and touching on themes of like you said, mental health, race, what it means to be a Black woman today, all those kind of things that I think resonates to me and the people that I know. And I feel like I also want to be a part of projects like that because it's important.
Right?
You want to see yourself on screen.
Absolutely. And we keep saying that representation is everything, and we're not just saying that to be flippant. Like, it really is.
Yeah.
You know, if Candice, and I know she would never have a room full of white writers, it just wouldn't have translated. She wouldn't be able to get the message across as she did in a way with having Black women in that room.
Yeah.
And that's just a fact. So it's super important. But what was your when you saw it come to life on screen, what was your impression from the book to seeing it on screen?
It was really cool to see like how the creative team were able to like create this world, and this world in which like they were really like able to flesh out in a way that none of us could imagine, because it's also, when I read the book, it's my imagination.
Yeah.
So when you see it on screen, it's like, oh, okay, cool, that's the director's vision, and that's also some of the script, because ultimately it's like it's the production team who have the final say on all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was just really like interesting to kind of see those choices.
Yeah, definitely. It's always like you said, you know, you're reading a book and then it's always your imagination first and how you're interpreting that and what that might look like. So to see it actually come to life, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is very cool. So your work has been described as relatable, funny and very honest. How do you balance humour and vulnerability in production, particularly when tackling more challenging topics like grief or failure?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, I always try to work from an honest place. And I try to keep it as relatable as possible, meaning I don't ever write something that I think is far-fetched. I tend to lean on like real things I've seen, experienced or heard. And then obviously fictionalizing bits so it's not like traumatizing.
Right.
Because I think the biggest thing is like, especially if you're performing your own work, it can be traumatizing. You can re-traumatize yourself every single time if you're doing this show that's about you.
Yeah.
So for me, especially with Failure Project, I wanted to have something that felt really real and very honest. But if I'm honest, at points it is so real and so honest that even I'm affected when I see it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, when I read it and I watch videos back of the performance, it's a lot. Because I also know what that character of Ade goes through. I understand that I've been there at points, not fully because it's fictionalized, and other people I know have been there.
Right.
So it's also creating that sort of layer of protection
Right.
And I think for me, humor always comes out of the real situations. That's the way I like to write. You can write sitcoms and you can like add funny things in.
Yeah.
But for me, the things I love is when it's like, it's a real thing and then we're laughing and we're like, I'm laughing because I can relate to that.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It makes me think of Baby Reindeer, actually, when you said about performing your trauma. So what do you kind of put in place when you have to perform it to kind of add that layer of protection for yourself, I guess? Is there any way that you build up to the performance or anything you do beforehand?
Yeah. So like for Failure Project, I was like given therapy to help me with that process. And that was really helpful because it was like going on stage, performing the show, then post-show having to like hold space for audiences who would ask you questions, but also you're still processing what's happened, right? And having to relive that every time. You need an outlet. Having like family and friends who I called constantly. I can only imagine what it would be like to have a story like Baby Reindeer, because that is
very intense. And if ever anybody hasn't watched it or listened, I would like encourage you to, because it's such a raw piece of work, right, to present to the world.
But also I hope that he's getting all the support and is looked after and is nourished, because it is so brave. And I really, really like to be able to talk so honestly about what happened to you is something that I think I see why, because people need to hear those kind of stories and also feel like, oh, I'm not alone. And without ruining it, there was a moment in there where I was like, I cried, because like watching it, you just feel the weight of what the character goes through. And like, I hope that he and other artists who create stories that are so raw to them get support.
Yes, very important too. And like I said, I'm sure he has, and I hope that he has done that. It's a great piece of work. We're going to change gears a little bit. So what changes do you hope to see in the future of the arts, particularly for underrepresented voices?
Agency in creating your own work. And also, like, let's be real, we're still in a world where like people aren't being paid to create. And I think that isn't fair, that isn't right. And I wish that there were more paid opportunities. And you're hearing about so many cuts to the arts and cuts to funding. So I'm praying that like people watch podcasts like this to be able to go, we need to create like platforms to be able to support creators to be able to make podcasts,
right? And
like creators to be able to like tell stories in however they want to tell stories or create their pieces of art, because otherwise what ends up happening is people step away from the industry,
right?
Because they can't afford it.
Right, exactly. And you know, giving people the autonomy as well, that's really important to go off and create, you know, rather than kind of having to go through these middlemen and these big corporates, and just owning our creating
and being championed.
Yeah.
I think it's that thing of like, it's not a one and done. It's like a thing of like continuously growing.
Yeah.
Like as an artist, I'm here, but there's so much I want to learn. And in order to learn, I have to have mentors. I have to be able to have space to fail. And I think when you get to a point, you're not allowed to fail. You have to do well. And if you don't do well, then it's sort of like, or maybe you're a one-hit wonder.
It's like that pressure to prove yourself over and over. It's ridiculous. But you mentioned like mentoring. So what were some of your support systems coming up?
So I've had really cool like mentors who have allowed me to be able to think about the next sort of stage of my career, be that like writing mentors, be that like producing mentors, be that acting mentors, and those kind of people championed me. And I think the next level is sort of like thinking about ownership, because I think for me to think about legacy is a big thing. Like I would love to keep creating stories till I'm very, very old, but there's also so much I can tell.
Right.
So I want to be able to have a sense of like ownership and be able to champion other people and be able to have money to be able to help them make those stories, you know? So I'd love to be able to do those things next, because I love storytelling. Be that in an art gallery, be that on stage, be that in film or TV. So I want to be able to get to a point where I can.
Yeah, and so facilitating others and coming up and I guess mentoring yourself, you know, and paying it forward.
I do mentor now and I love that. Yeah. Oh my God, yeah, always mentoring. And I love it. But there's also so much I can do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's like even today before the podcast, I had like 3 or 4 meetings, and I've also got to do writing things. There's constantly things I've got to do, as well as like trying to make sure I'm looking after my own mental health. You know, all those kind of things we have to do. So I would love to be able to be in a place where it's like championing other people as well.
Yes. I'm sure you will definitely make all of that work. So you've had such an exciting journey so far, from award-winning plays to international collaborations and working with major platforms like Disney, Channel 4. So what's next for you?
I think some of that, like I mentioned, of like championing other people's work. So like at the moment I'm working with 2 other producers. We've kind of come together because we're like, we want to see other great artists make work. So we're coming together to produce another person's comedy show. Okay. Yeah, I've never produced comedy.
Okay. So this is a new field you're entering.
New field.
Yeah.
I'm not in it. So I'm like behind the scenes.
Yep.
I'm working as the producer and dramaturgy and sort of like helping to craft that story. And I want to do more of that because I think, there are shows that I can do, and like Failure Project, I'm sure we'll have another life and we'll take it out on the road and all that kind of stuff. Yep. And I'll make other shows, but I also want to work with other people to help them have their vision come to life, and where they've sort of felt like, oh, I haven't been able to because I haven't had the opportunity. Well, actually, why not use the opportunities that I've had and the connections that I've made to be able to help others?
Yeah, absolutely. And is there kind of anything else coming up that you can share, or are we just...
I think so. I would say like I'm still making new shows.
Yep.
So I'm gonna have some new shows I'll probably have out next year, which feels weird to say because we're like in September.
We're very close to next year. Someone posted the other day that we're 100 days away from Christmas, and I just wanted to scream.
You do that make me feel so anxious and stressed. I remember seeing in like Edinburgh, the mist of summer, like we're literally in like, I think it was the first week of August, someone was like, only 9 Saturdays until autumn, and I'm like, can I enjoy my summer?
Yeah, please.
Can I have a summer?
It's like living in the future. Let's just enjoy the present for a minute.
Also, it gets grey. Do we forget we live in the UK? The UK is grey. Yeah. I need the sun.
And it's been grey this summer. There's been no summer at all. So I thought it would be more greyer in Edinburgh.
Oh, it was way greyer.
Oh, right.
That's why I thought down here was sunny. From when people talking about the heat wave, I was like, what heat wave? We don't have no heat wave.
There was no heat wave anywhere, not in Edinburgh, not in London.
People lie.
We had like a day here and there, but the majority of it was terrible.
I'm glad you said that because I spent so long feeling really upset.
No.
I was like, I missed out on this heat wave. Obviously, I loved Edinburgh and I'm glad I was there, but everyone was talking about, oh, it's so sunny down here. I'm having a great time.
A day here and there. Like literally, I think over all of summer, we probably had 2 weeks combined. Yes. June was freezing. It was just,
it was just June, July. Yeah. I just need someone to like pay for me to like spend winter somewhere else.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like make work internationally during the winter season.
Just miss it completely.
Then come back for summer and I'm back making shows. So yeah, I think those would be my things for like shows coming out next year. And doing like, as well as doing shows, I also do like mentoring and workshops. So I'll be doing more workshops next year because I want to sort of like support other people who want to make art.
Yes,
you know,
that would be incredible. So we are coming towards the end, and I always like to ask my guests about a value. So it's a value for your professional life and a value for your personal life. So it can be one word, it can be a sentence, whatever kind of resonates with you. So let's start with your professional life.
Create a legacy that you are proud of.
I like that. Create a legacy you're proud of. And for your personal life,
try to find as much joy no matter where you are.
I like that. Legacy and joy. I love that. Thank you so much for your time and coming down. And it's been a lovely chat. If people want to follow your journey, where can they find you?
Yolanda Mercy on all social media platforms. And then my website, which is yolandamercy.com,
which has a lovely picture of you as a young girl. I love it. It's so cute. Thank you so much again. And guys, thank you so much for following and joining. If you want to follow the Black Circle, it's on Instagram on blackcircle.podcast and on YouTube, the Black Circle Podcast, and Spotify. Like, follow, subscribe. You know it. Bye.